The sound of her body hitting the ground was sickening when my tires ran over her. The crack of her skull against my car's grill. She had been bent down, probably tying her shoe, just low enough that I didn't see her. Right there, right in front of me. Why didn't she look up? Why didn't she hear me coming? I'm not going to tell you where I am. You'll figure it out when the news breaks. That's fine. I don't care anymore. But what was she doing out there? On that road, all alone in the middle of nowhere? Just dirt and corn stretching for miles. It's not like I wanted this. I didn't ask for it. I was in a hurry. It was raining. A thick fog rolled in, low and heavy across the ground. One moment I was looking down. The next, wham. Her body was there, twisted and broken, smeared across my grill like a goddamn nightmare I couldn't wake up from. What the hell was I supposed to do? You think you'd do better? You really believe you'd do the right thing and just take her body to the police? It was in the middle of nowhere. No witnesses. And I was supposed to just tie the manslaughter noose around my own neck? What if you weren't just driving for fun? What if your car was packed with enough weed to lock you away for 10 years? You telling me you'd risk 20, 30, 40 years rotting behind bars for this? Because some idiot decided to wander into the dark? You can speculate. Tell yourself you'd be better than me. But I know better. I lived through it. And I'm not about to sit here and act like I'm some goddamn saint. But you can't say it was all my fault. I stepped out of the car, and God, what a mess. Her arm was caught in the axle, torn clean from the socket. Blood was everywhere. Her auburn hair tangled in the hood, strands matted and slick with rain. Her head, Jesus, it was caved in, brain matter scattered across the pavement. And her legs, crushed under the tires, nothing left but ruin. I threw up. The rain came down in sheets, cold and merciless. The air smelled like a slaughterhouse, raw and metallic, thick with the stench of death. She had shit herself. I could smell that too. Zinc and copper clung to the air, the taste of blood thick on my tongue. There was that sharp ozone smell too, thunder rolling somewhere far off like a warning. Then I went to work. I yanked at the flesh caught in the axle, every pull slick and nauseating. A dent cratered the grill, but all I saw was blood. Each drop the rain washed away seemed to summon 10 more, leaking from her shattered skull. Then I heard it, agonal breathing, a weak, rattling gasp of a body refusing to die. A thin whistle from her lungs, like her tongue was lodged in her throat. She was alive, dying but still somehow hanging on. By the time I had her stashed away in the trunk, she had stopped breathing completely. I found her backpack lying 10 feet from the road, tossed aside like some sad afterthought. I tried to gather her teeth. God, I think I missed a few. I threw what was left of her arm in with her, dragging it free from the wheel well. And as I drove back home, all I could feel was panic, clawing at my throat. If I got pulled over, I'd say I hit a deer. That was the plan. The dent in the hood, the blood, a deer. Nothing more. When I got home and opened the trunk, I knew something was wrong. Her body had shifted. I told myself it was just the drive. Bumpy roads, gravity doing its work. But then I saw her face. Her eyelids were open. One eye bloodshot, veins like cracks in glass. Blood trickled from her broken nose, down her ruined scalp. Her jaw was wrong, split beneath the teeth. And those eyes, God help me, I stared into them, watched as they locked onto me, pupils dilated, as if she was still there. And then, in that moment, I swear to God, she smiled. Her eyes, those eyes, even with her broken jaw, she smiled at me, smiling like the Cheshire Cat after someone had taken a baseball bat to its smug, grinning face. I slammed the trunk shut, hard enough to make the whole car shake. My heart pounded in my chest, like hooves against the ground, relentless. Every beat a stab of pain, sharp and crushing, like my ribs were splitting open. My pulse kicked wildly in my throat, palpitations racing through me like I was about to drop dead from a heart attack. I live alone, always have. The house, an old 80s-era colonial, was left to me after my parents died. Most homes nowadays don't have a dirt floor crawl space in the basement, but mine does. And really, where else was I supposed to put her? I don't get visitors. I keep to myself. Reclusive, they'd call it. I work at the toll booth during the day. That's it. No friends dropping by, no neighbors poking around. But I didn't have the courage to cut her apart, to hack her into pieces and throw them into some river miles away. That felt like crossing a line. Dismemberment, desecration. But really, considering everything I had already done, would it have even mattered? I dug deep, 6 feet down, maybe more, wrapped her in a blue tarp, thick and plastic, and shoved her into the hole. But the smell, God, the smell hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just death. It was wrong. Sharp ammonia, like rancid cat piss, mixed with sulfur. Rotten eggs cracked open in the sun. Spoiled milk choking in the back of your throat. I buried her, filled the hole back in, packed the dirt as best I could. But the smell didn't go away. It lingered. I scrubbed my car clean, pulled clumps of her hair from the bumper, slick with dried blood. I tore the upholstery from the trunk and burned it, watching the fabric curl and blacken in the flames. I didn't dare take the car to a mechanic. If things went south, if anyone started asking questions, that car would be the rope around my neck. So I left it, parked it in the garage and locked it tight. I even burned my stash. All of it. Didn't care about selling it anymore. Money didn't matter. Nothing did. Days passed. I called in sick to work, food poisoning, I said. My manager bought it, gave me that fake sympathy, but they didn't care. Nobody did. I biked to the store for supplies, sweat-soaked and paranoid. Car locked away like a coffin on wheels. I bought cans of Febreze, wall diffusers, anything to kill the smell. But it didn't help. The stench was overwhelming. It seeped through the vents, thick and rancid, like the breath of something monstrous and hungry. I could almost hear it, each exhale a wet, foul sigh, dragging through the ducts like something alive was tasting the air. I was in the living room a few nights ago, plugs jammed in my nose, when the TV flicked on by itself. The local news, her face. It wasn't the ruin I had left in my trunk. No, this was before. A photo of her, smiling, bright-eyed, captured in a high school volleyball team picture. Perfect. Alive. Guilt hit me like ice water down my spine. My skin crawled, like insect legs scratching just beneath the surface. Tiny, invisible claws brushing up my arms. They said she was missing. Talk of police searches. The community rallying together. I turned it off. Flicked back on. I unplugged the TV. The screen went dark, but her face lingered, burned into the glass. A faint ghost image seared into the pixels. I grabbed a paperweight and smashed it through the screen. Shards of glass scattered across the floor. That did the trick. I stopped answering calls after that. Let them pile up. I found out I'd lost my job through a voicemail I never listened to. A week had passed. I was drowning in panic, too consumed by it to care. I destroyed every radio, every TV, yanked my landline straight from the wall when it started ringing, and wouldn't stop. I didn't dare listen. I didn't want to know what was on the other end. Then the flies came, lazy, black things thick as pencil erasers. They bit hard, like tiny can openers tearing at my skin. They gathered on the windowsills, piled high in sticky black drifts, their brittle corpses crunching underfoot. And still the smell lingered. I was taking a shower when I first heard the tapping behind the wall. At first, I told myself it was just the pipes adjusting, nothing unusual. Houses creak and groan all the time. But then came the scuffling, something dragging, slow and deliberate, like a predator pulling along its kill. My mind betrayed me then. I imagined her shattered legs, bent at impossible angles, trailing behind her like the slug-slick remnants of something that should have stayed dead. The sounds didn't stop. The tapping, the dragging, always there, always closer. Late at night, above my bed, circling like a shark beneath the waves. Dust trickled down from the ceiling, forming neat little pyramids on my sheets. It followed me from room to room, the sound of something sliding across the ceiling, kitchen to bathroom to bedroom, like a loyal dog shadowing its owner. But this wasn't a raccoon, and it sure as hell wasn't anything natural. 2 nights ago, I was sitting in the bathtub trying to drown it out. Just the rush of water filling the tub, the only sound I could trust. I thought maybe I could wash the fear off, scrub the stench of rot and guilt from my skin. But the smell lingered, damp, sour, festering no matter how much I cleaned. Then tap, soft, beneath me. I froze, every muscle locking up like ice had filled my veins. Another tap, closer this time, deliberate. I told myself it was in my head, just like the scratching, just like the dragging in the walls. And then thump, a slow, heavy knock from beneath the water. The surface rippled with it, tiny waves trembling outward. I leaned forward, staring into the water's reflection. And that's when I saw it. Something drifting from the drain, wet and clumpy, like tendrils stretching toward the surface. I reached down without thinking, pulled it free. A clump of auburn hair, still attached to a slick patch of scalp, pale and quarter-sized. I threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening thud. My stomach churned, bile rising. But then the drain started gurgling. Deep, greedy sounds like something was drinking from below. The water swirled faster, slurping down in wet gulps. And then it stopped. The drain stared back at me, open and dark, like an eye that couldn't blink. And something inside it moved. A shadow bulged beneath the porcelain. Fingers clawed at the underside, scratching from the other side. I couldn't see them, but I felt them, long, cold nails scraping for release. Frozen, helpless, I watched as something pale forced its way through. A single broken finger, bloated and rotten, pushing through the drain. Twitched, searching, like a worm writhing out of the soil during a storm. I bolted from the tub, slipping hard on the wet tile, splitting my knee open. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. It wasn't enough that she had destroyed my car, ruined my life, and put me at risk of prison. No, she couldn't leave it at that. Now she was haunting me, mocking me. I grabbed a roofing hammer from the garage and planted myself in the living room, listening to the dragging, the shifting. She was in the walls now, moving, watching. When I heard her slither past the far wall, rage took over. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed forward and began tearing into the drywall, hammering again and again. Bits of plaster rained down like snow. I caught sight of something pale, an arm, a leg, slithering just out of reach. And the smell. When the wall cracked open, it hit me like a freight train. Rotten eggs, ammonia, and decaying flesh, thick enough to taste on the back of my tongue. She was contaminating my home, infecting it. I swung the hammer again, but before I could pull back, it was yanked from my hands, sucked into the wall with terrifying force. I stumbled backward, crashing into a lamp, breath ripped from my chest. All I could do was stare at the hole, gaping, useless, like a fish out of water. And then I saw it, that eye, dark crimson bulging through the fracture in the wall. It watched me, split with jagged red lines like a cracked mirror. And every primal part of me screamed, "Run." Couldn't run. Deep down, in the marrow of my bones and the electric pulse of my brain, I knew I'd screwed up. I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Before this, there were rules. She had the walls. I had the rest of the house. That boundary, thin and fragile as it was, had held. Until I broke it. Until I opened a door. And from that moment on, everything got worse. That night, as I lay in bed, every breath shallow and ragged, I heard it. The peeling of drywall. The slow, deliberate tear of the hole widening. A sound wet and gritty, like muscle being stripped from bone. I thought about vampires then, how they had to be invited in. Had I done that? Was smashing through that wall an invitation? When I finally worked up the nerve to rush downstairs, slower this time, more cautious, I saw what had become of the hole. It had widened into a mouth. The jagged edges of the drywall jutted out like cracked, broken teeth. She was inside now, inside my house. I bolted back upstairs, locked the door, shoved the dresser up against it with shaking hands. And then silence. No scratching, no dragging, no circling from the walls while I lay there, eyes bloodshot and wide open, plugs jammed into my nose to fight that goddamn smell. Sulfur, decay, roadkill. And that's what she was now, wasn't she? Just roadkill. But then came the thumping. Below me, cabinets ripped from their hinges, drawers wrenched free and hurled across the floor. The unraveling of my home, my sanity, coming apart like a loose spool of thread. The destruction lasted all night. And then closer, I heard her crawl up the stairs. A wet, dragging thump, like a half-paralyzed child clawing her way upward. Thump, thump, closer. Then she slammed against my door. Again and again. No words, no heavy breathing, just the smell, thick and suffocating, burning in the back of my throat, so close I could taste it. At dawn, she left. I heard her slither away, back to whatever crack she crawled out of, retreating to the spaces between reality and madness. When I moved the dresser, I found two things. A framed photo of me and my parents, smashed, crumpled beneath shattered glass and a mangled frame. Bite marks in the wood from a mouth that wasn't whole. Teeth uneven, broken, and the door, punched through. Several holes as if she'd driven her fists into it. But then I saw the hammer, my hammer, embedded high in the wood, higher than it should have been, as if she had been standing on those twisted, broken legs. Splintered bone grinding through flesh and cartilage like knives through wet paper, like a toddler taking its first unstable steps. I laughed, a raw, guttural noise that clawed its way out of my throat. I couldn't take it anymore. Sleepless nights, the stench, the violation of my home, my control. I had to know. I had to see with my own eyes. Prove it was all in my head. This was my house. I wasn't going to let some stupid idiot, too careless to tie her shoes on the side of the road, take it away from me. I needed to see her, convince myself she was still there, rotting in that pit, mangled, dead. But the moment I crawled into the basement, I knew I'd made another mistake, like the hammer in the wall, like smashing through the drywall. I was crossing another line in a rulebook I didn't understand. The crawl space was darker than it had ever been. The air thick and humid, the dirt wet beneath my feet, clinging to me like decay. The smell of sulfur and rot suffocated every breath. I started digging. The deeper I went, the more my skin crawled. Gooseflesh prickled along my arms, every hair standing on edge. 3 feet down, I heard it, scuttling, dragging, far off but getting closer. Click, click, fingernails tapping, a low thump. For feet down, I expected to see her hand, her foot, anything. Thump. 5 feet down, I found it. The edges of the blue tarp, crumpled and filthy, half swallowed by the earth. And then something fell into the crawl space with me. The sound of wet, rancid meat hitting the dirt. From the corner, where the wall met the floor. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I peeled the edge of the tarp open. Nothing. Empty. Hollow as a grave with no corpse. No clicking of nails. Just the wet, dragging sound now. Slow and steady. Like something ancient and patient moving through the dirt. Something hungry. Every instinct in me screamed, don't look. Don't flash the light toward the sound. Don't acknowledge it. So I didn't. But then I saw it. Tunnel. A narrow, collapsed burrow in the earth, leading away from the tarp and toward the cracks in the walls. Like she had writhed her way out. A worm slipping through the soil, dragging herself back into the shadows. I left the hole behind, left the tarp, crawled toward the faint glow of the hatch, heart pounding like a war drum, huffing, stumbling, dirt filling my mouth, the copper sting of fear biting my tongue. But I could hear her behind me, that dragging. No breath, no groans, just silence and that awful, wet pull of something dead moving toward me. The hatch slammed shut above me. I screamed. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't bring myself to shine the light behind me. If I saw her, I knew it would break me. I crawled faster like a dog, frantic and pathetic. My hands clawed at the earth. My knees scraped raw. My head slammed into a wooden post. Crack. White-hot pain exploded behind my eyes, and blood spilled down my face, thick and blinding. But I could hear her picking up speed. The dragging sound grew faster, more eager. I had to look. I didn't want to, but I had to. I turned the flashlight, and there she was, a broken rictus in the beam of my light, more rotten than I could have imagined. Skin sloughing off in ribbons, scalp peeled back like the torn skin of an orange, revealing wet, red bone beneath. Her body contorted into a sick parody of a crawl, like a spider with every leg snapped. Her arm reattached, but wrong. Bones stabbing through torn flesh like jagged knives. Her elbows bent outward, her knees twisted inward, an obscene mimicry of movement. And she was grinning, frozen in the beam like a deer caught in headlights. Her spine arched high above her head, jagged and crooked beneath her tattered shirt, an unnatural mountain range clawing for the sky. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because then she moved. Sudden, violent. She charged. Her hands slapped the wet earth, arms pinwheeling, legs convulsing and crunching with every frantic step. Her broken body hurtled forward with terrifying speed. God, how was she so fast? The sound of cracking bones echoed through the crawl space. Clicks, pops, the awful shuffle of shattered limbs dragging forward, pulling her closer. I reached the hatch. I forced it open, clawing at the frame, every muscle screaming. But something heavy pushed down from above. She was so close. That sulfurous stench, rot, death, and vengeance was inches away, and all I could do was push. I wrenched the hatch open with a burst of raw, terrified strength and threw myself up the ladder. She hit the ladder behind me hard. The impact rattled the wood like a dog lunging for a ball and missing by inches. A wet, meaty thud followed as she collapsed below, but she didn't stay down. I heard her shuffle, then brace, knuckling onto her wrists like a broken marionette finding its balance again. I slammed the hatch shut, locked it. She wasn't playing anymore. No more taunting, no more games, no dragging sounds meant to pull terror from me like blood from a wound. Now she wanted me. The cellar door shook beneath me as she slammed into it, over and over, relentless. No hesitation. No breath between each hit. A machine with no soul behind its violence. That's when I saw it. The dresser had fallen across the hatch, wedged tightly in place. She set a trap. That calculating, venomous thing had found a way to let it drop. Maybe she had weakened the leg, worn it down until it would collapse at the right moment. She turned on the TV before. God knows what else she could do. I imagined what she would have done to me if she had gotten hold of me. The frantic banging didn't stop. Each hit came without pause, without hesitation. Pure, mechanical persistence. I flipped the dresser back over, scattering a wave of those fat, lazy flies that had made my misery their nest, and sat on top of it, bracing myself against the door. And it didn't even feel angry. That was the worst part. Felt like she was enjoying it. The way she threw her broken body into the hatch. Again and again, it wasn't rage driving her. It was hunger, the reckless, obsessive violence of a predator that didn't care if it tore itself apart in the process. Like a chained pit bull gnawing through its own flesh just to rip apart a stray cat. Relentless, predatory, unstoppable. That was 10 minutes ago. I sat there, thinking about burning it all down, just torching the entire house, lighting her up along with everything else. But what if she didn't burn? What if she survived? That thought twisted in my gut like a knife. Somehow that would be worse. No, couldn't let it end that way. I made my decision. I would turn myself in. I'd go to prison. Confess to everything. Everything. If it meant I'd never have to hear her again. Never hear her nails scraping through the walls. Never hear her mangled hands thumping toward me in the dark. She had become a disease. A cancer gnawing through the fabric of my reality. But I could take back one thing. Control. I could still have that.